In this lecture, we're going to start working towards building buildings with our workers. Step 1 of that will be a new build buildings action that will override what we see on the UI in our actions after we've activated that. Let's go. Our UI paradigm in most RTS game UI paradigms are that we have a bottom bar, sometimes on the side, with a limited set of actions we can issue per unit. In our case, we have 9. And for most units, 9 is plenty. There's only so many things we can do. But our workers are really the most complex units because they need to also gather things and build a large number of buildings. If we only have a handful of buttons, that becomes problematic. In most games, there's a build button, maybe 2 build buttons, and sometimes those can even have multiple pages. In this course, we have a limited number of buildings, so we can do it with just a single button. If you were to expand it out, you may go the StarCraft route to have build and advanced buildings for 2 different pages to give the player quick access to however many different buildings you need to have. Let's quickly recap how this works because it's been a minute since we've touched on the UI. The abstract commandable has our current available values, things like our max health and which commands we can issue. Each of these commands, which extend our action base and implement iCommand, have an icon and where they should go on the UI. So gather icon being 5, when we select a worker, shows up in 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the UI. And that's handled by our runtime UI, specifically our actions container. It has a reference to all these buttons. And over in VS Code, based on the currently selected units, we refresh the buttons and pick which ones should be displayed. So to replace these, it's really just a matter of either overriding our available commands or having a second set of commands that we should activate when we click on that build buildings. So if we just walk through that, we can see we're going to need a new action that's going to show on the UI. And what it should do is somehow override these commands. And depending on how we implement that, we may need to make some change to the actions UI. And we may need to tie into our runtime UI to let it know that, hey, tell the actions UI to refresh. Because once we've clicked that button, we want to see different stuff show up, right? Let's come over into VS Code, and we can tell we're going to need a new command. And that's going to extend our action base. So commands, let's right click. Let's make a new file in here called override commands command. In there, we'll put that in our namespace, GameDevTV, RTS commands, and make it a public class, override commands command. That extends an action base, and we will implement all of those abstract functions here, can handle and handle. I'll just correct that little class name typo real fast. What additional context do you think we need here in order to make this work? On our abstract commandable, we have an array of action base. So here, we probably want the same. We'll attach a field, serialized field, public action base array of commands with a public get and a private set. And of course, add that using Unity Engine. We'll come back to whether we can or can't handle this particular command. Let's see what we need to do on the abstract commandable because that really determines what we need to do here. If we look at abstract commandable, our available commands have a private set, which probably makes sense. Probably don't want just anybody modifying this arbitrarily, but we do need some way to change these. Let's come down to the bottom and say, let's do a public void set command overrides that accepts an action base array of commands. And while we could just assign our available commands to be these commands, that leaves us with a little bit of a problem. How do we restore our available commands then? So that's not exactly going to work. But what we can do is back up at the top, do a private action base array of initial commands. And on start, assign that from our available commands. Now in set command overrides, we can now do if commands equal to null or a command's length is 0, we can restore our available commands to the initial commands. So we know if we call this function with null or an empty array, we'll restore the initial ones. Otherwise, we'll just take whatever was provided. In the else block, just assign the available commands to the commands provided. Now in our runtime UI, remember this is the class that provides information and data to our actions UI or building UI, all those subcomponents of the UI. That way we can just have the one set of code the one time, and it will pass down information to any of those subcomponents. So a top-down data flow or a one-directional data flow. Whenever we select or deselect a unit, remember these are hash sets, so we can't add duplicates. And whenever we do that, we call this enable for function, which will refresh which buttons are displayed. So an easy way for us to hook into that would be to, whenever we call the set command overrides in the abstract commandable, to raise that this unit was selected after we've overridden the commands. How do we do that? Bus of type unit selected event dot raise new unit selected event this. Now this will get us most of the way there, but we can run into a couple problems. So let's preemptively solve those so we don't freeze our editor later. In our player input, we have a list of selected units. So if we repeatedly raise a unit selected event with the same unit, we'll keep expanding this list, which will eventually look bad when we show we've got 10 units selected, but there's only one. Let's convert this from an expression-bodied function into a normal function by adding in those curly braces and removing the fat arrow. Let's then check if not selected units.contains evt.unit. Then we'll add the unit just to make sure we're not adding that same unit. That's not the biggest problem that we have though. In our UI action button, which is, remember, the script that's attached to these buttons, we have a potential, if we don't call disable, to keep adding on-click listeners, which will eventually cause a problem for us. So before we go any further, let's go ahead and do this button on-click remove all listeners at the top of enable for extra safety. Now that we're safe, let's head over into our override commands command. Implementing the rest of this is this lecture's challenge. Implement the override commands command to override an abstract commandable's commands when issued. Use the create asset menu as follows: a file name of override commands, a menu name of units, commands, override commands, and an order of 110. Pause the video, implement this override commands command, and I'll see you right back here. All right, welcome back. We'll jump right into it. We'll start with the create asset menu, providing a file name of override commands, a menu name of units, commands, override commands, and an order of 110. In can handle, we just need the context commandable to not be null, because a commandable is an abstract commandable, and that's the only requirement for this command. In handle, we just need to call context.commandable.setCommand overrides, providing it with the commands. That's it. Now, those of you who were really paying attention will notice that we changed the menu name from the rest of the commands. If we look at build unit command, that's under building commands build unit. But this is expected to be applied to only buildings. When we look at a gather command, we're under AI commands. I think it makes more sense under the units. So let's change our gather command to the units/command/gather menu name. Same with move, replace that AI with units. And of course, stop as well. Let's come back into Unity, and in our Assets Units Commands folder in the project panel, we can go right-click, create Units Commands, Override Commands. Let's name this one Show Buildings Action. For the icon, let's use the tools to build. This should be slot 6, and this does not require click to activate. And just to make sure it's working, let's provide them one command, a stop action. And we'd really like a way to reset back to the original commands, right? We don't want them to get stuck in this building state, so we probably need a reset commands action. Let's, again, in the project panel, Assets, Units, Commands, right-click, create Units, Commands, again, an override command, and we'll name this one Reset Commands Action. Set the icon to be this ban cross icon thing. Set it to be slot 8. This also doesn't require click to activate, and for our commands, we can just leave that as an empty array. Because remember, we set up in VS Code where if we provided no commands, it would automatically reset to those initial commands. Then on our worker, we go to Units Worker, find that worker prefab. On their available commands, let's add in the Show Buildings action. And on that Show Buildings action, we need to add that Reset Commands action. With just that small bit of code and that configuration, let's see what happens. We can click play, select a worker, and we can see we've got that build. We press build, awesome. We see a new set of commands show up, and we press the cancel button, boom, it takes us back to the original. But we do have a problem here. If we click build, deselect the unit, select them again, they're still in the building state, which is not really a desirable behavior. We'd expect whenever we select them again to reset to this initial state. So let's hop over into VS Code. On our abstract commandable, when we deselect a unit, we can call set command overrides null which remember, will just set us back to our initial commands. Coming back to Unity, click play, and let's try it out once more. Now if we select a worker, tell them to build, deselect them, when we select them again, we'd expect to see their default commands. And we do. That's perfect. So that looks like everything's working okay. That's all we've got for this lecture. We've set up a scalable way to be able to adjust our actions per unit. This, of course, doesn't have to be just for building. That's our current use case, but this could be for any reason we need to override the actions. We can use this type of action to do that. When you're ready to move on, I'll see you on the next lecture.